go back, get ready for broadcasting, go on air, did a great job. Like, didn't even have to look at my notes. It was awesome. And I remember like so vividly getting back to my dorm room and sitting down on my bed and just think like the first thought that popped in my head was what's next.
Mm.
And it was like this like everything I had wanted to happen in one day happened. And it was such an empty feeling.
Hit 'em with a little bit of dopamine to keep 'em looking every second. They'll be second guessing, trying to meet the expectation of the age of information. The simulation will be so convincing they'll forget that they're alive.
Thomas, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, John. Really glad to be here. I'm just so excited to talk about this topic of dopamine. It's something that I've gotten to study a while I've been doing youth ministry in Austin at All Saints Pres, and we were kind of joking beforehand, like it's my students are kind of starting to roll their eyes because I could just talk about it forever, and it seems to come up all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say on the front end too, really, you're the reason why we're doing this season of the podcast. that just to let our listeners know, because I can't remember if I've mentioned this in another podcast or not, but I know you taught an elective this past summer at our Colorado conference on the topic of dopamine. And I mean, that was extremely well attended. I think that was the biggest elective we had that just kind of showed, oh, wow, students are very interested in this as well as leaders. But then you had reached out and just said, hey, I've done some reading on this. This could be an interesting topic. And from that, that's really just got the ball rolling on, okay, what could a season look like of this topic of dopamine? And I know we talked back in January, reaching out to Anna Lemke, who we thought, yeah, there's no chance she's going to come on this podcast. And lo and behold, she's coming on the podcast. And so
Yeah.
that's pretty exciting to be able to talk to her. And I know we'll reference her. But I did just want to say that up front of just thanking you for kind of bringing this topic to us. And yeah, looking forward to talking about it. And Thomas, I know you mentioned that you're doing youth ministry in Austin. Remind me, how long have you been in youth ministry at Austin? Did you do anything prior to All Saints? Just yeah, give us some background there too.
Yeah. So basically, my entire youth ministry experience has been in Austin at All Saints. I was a youth intern in college for about 2.5 years, and then have been the youth director after I graduated from UT for about 4.5 years. So about 7 years total. I have some kids graduating now this year who were in sixth grade when I started.
That's
So I'm
awesome.
getting old,
Yeah.
but it's been such a blessing to get to be in one spot for so long, and just get to see so much growth, and it's just a great place.
Well, it's funny to look at you and to hear you say, I'm getting old. And then I look at myself right on this podcast. Yeah, I don't want to hear that yet. Um, but let's definitely jump into just this topic of dopamine. And I thought it'd be interesting, as I said, giving background to this season that you kind of brought this topic up to us. But how just personally, when did you start thinking, okay, what is dopamine? I want to read about dopamine. Just yeah, let us know a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think I probably started getting into dopamine, or kind of reading into it kind of the same way probably so many people have, as it's kind of exploded in kind of the Huberman kind of world of people who are kind of interested in neuroscience and what is kind of going on behind our brains and our actions and our choices. And just kind of like, I think a lot of our world's kind of self optimization, everyone has their fitness trackers and trying to figure out how can I optimize sleep and optimize my workout and optimize all these things. So I think some of it came out of that, of just being really fascinated with neuroscience and seeing all the data and that kind of stuff. But I think on the other hand, I think like so many other people have experienced, we live in a world, anyone in the Western world where we have so many things, so many comforts, so many gifts and opportunities, and going, if we have all these things, why don't we feel as good as we feel like we should, or as good as social media portrays that we should feel, or movies portray that we feel like? Why does there seem to be this disconnect between contentment and all the things that I have? And so kind of in just wrestling through that and going through different seasons of kind of feeling burned out, and kind of wrestling through some depression, and just kind of going like, why can't I seem to feel happy despite everything. And so kind of in that, I think someone maybe had recommended Limke's book, Dopamine Nation. And so started reading that and listened to a podcast, I think by Andrew Huberman. And all of a sudden, as I was reading it and reading another book called Molecule of More by Lieberman and Long, and just going, wait a second, not only is this fascinating, this lines up with scripture. And then kind of comparing it to Ecclesiastes and comparing it to Paul writing about contentment and comparing it to Jesus writing about anxiety and kind of trusting in him, like just seeing this kind of full scale kind of like connection between neuroscience and God's creation was fascinating to me. And kind of beyond that, I think just became a really helpful tool for me in my life. Um, but even I guess to go back before then, before I was even kind of thinking about dopamine, I mean, before this podcast, we were talking about like 5 years ago, no one was really talking about dopamine outside of like neuroscientists, and now we're all talking about it. But I remember, I think I shared this in my dopamine lecture or elective at RYM. But my freshman year of college, I remember going into freshman year and I was like, I have two goals for freshman year of college. I want to go out with a cute girl, and I was studying sports journalism. So I was like, I want to go on air doing, sports broadcasting at the student television station. And one day, like I had asked out a girl, we had a date. And that night I was going to go on the television station and get to, be the sports commentator or whatever. And so go on the date, everything went well, made plans for a second date. It was awesome. Go back, get ready for broadcasting, go on air, like did a great job, like didn't even have to look at my notes. It was awesome. And I remember like so vividly getting back to my dorm room and sitting down on my bed and just think like the first thought that popped in my head was, what's next?
Mm.
And it was like this like everything I had wanted to happen in one day happened. And it was such an empty feeling. It was like, I need more. And so for me, I think that like I kind of constantly, remember going back to that moment and going, okay, yeah, what else is there? If I'm kind of filling myself with all these things and it's not enough, what else is there? And so that kind of, I guess, would be kind of well before I was thinking about dopamine. But this kind of example that I'm sure we've all experienced of whether it's winning a championship or a great vacation or finally getting a boyfriend or girlfriend and then going, why doesn't this fulfill the deepest desires of my heart like I had told myself it would or like society told me it would? Um, and so I think kind of so much of that kind of then led into all of my getting to study about dopamine and learning a lot.
Yeah. That's interesting, and it's great to just hear that personal anecdote because, yes, everyone listening to this has had those moments where just incredible high, all the things I wanted, they happened, and now I still am feeling unfulfilled. There's still this void there as well. And so I like to just kind of going back how you're talking about the neuroscience aspect, but then, hey, scripture is talking to this as well. And so maybe just kind of
hmm
bridge those two things for us a little bit more.
Yeah, I would love to. And actually, if y'all don't mind, can I read a little bit of Psalm 121 to kind of
Absolutely. Yeah.
bridge this? Yeah. So in Psalm 121, this is when I was teaching the class, was kind of the anchor passage. And so it says this, it's a song of ascents. The Israelites would sing this as they were journeying up to Jerusalem to worship. But it says this, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. It's a very encouraging psalm, but I love the way it starts because it talks about lifting up our eyes. And in the book, The Molecule of More, the scientists, Dr. Lieberman and Dr. Long, talk about how dopamine is always involved in things that we have to look out to. In other words, something that is not in our grasp, because dopamine is this molecule that gives us energy and motivation to go get something. And so when we're looking out towards something not in our grasp, that's where the dopamine kind of spikes in order to get us that energy to go get the food or the shelter or whatever it is that our brain is telling us that we need. And the psalmist is saying that where we lift up our eyes to is what we're looking to help us. And when we think about the hills, yes, one of the hills that the Israelites would be looking to was Jerusalem, which they were going to. But hills in those days was just a common place for any kind of worship. So even pagan people would be worshiping their gods in the hills. And so the psalmist is saying, what hill are you looking to for your salvation? Where are you looking to try to find your help? And so I think this is for all of us. We are all looking to some place or something to save us, to help us. And this psalm reminds us that though we're looking for all different things, there's only one who will not let our foot be moved, who will not sleep or slumber so that we can rest, who will keep us from all evil. And so I just love that connection there. I think Ecclesiastes is a wonderful, I mean, talk about a book that's really all about dopamine. You have this king who gets to experience all these pleasures, all these joys, and kind of gets to the end and goes, yeah, it was vanity. It was worthless. It's like breath on a cold day. It's there and then it's gone. Um, and how do we live in that world? And actually, our senior pastor at All Saints, Tim Frickenschmidt, just preached a great sermon on Ecclesiastes 1 and talks about, Ecclesiastes 1 talks about the rivers running to the sea and the sea is still not filled. And, again, I think we can all relate to that. We never, have one round of golf where we're like, that's it, I'm done. That was a great round. Or we go on one vacation, we go, I never need to go skiing again. I never need to eat food again. And in some ways that's great. Like God's given us this world with blessings and we get to find enjoyment and ski trip after ski trip and, football game after football game and laughter with friends time after time. But in other ways, right, the fulfillment, like we just always need more, like the sea just never being filled. What our pastor's point was, which I thought was brilliant, is Ecclesiastes is all about life under the sun. And so life kind of under the heavens it is never going to satisfy us. But there is someone above the sun who gives life and gives meaning and gives purpose to all of these things. And so I think so much of kind of the solution to how do we live in this dopamine filled world is not just like we need to avoid stuff, but is also to enjoy things from the giver of these gifts. And so I think just kind of seeing all of that in scripture and then connecting it with the neuroscience, it is just fascinating seeing so many connections. In some ways, it's not even fast. It's like, of course, God created all of us. We just
Right.
kind of can forget all that.
Um,
One thing that I found that is so kind of fascinating in conversations with students and even just conversations with other young adults. I think I'm technically still in Gen Z. And so, like talking with friends at my church, talking with students, and it feels like there's this sentiment that we all know that something is off. Like we all know that our phones probably aren't good for us, like that, or that we're using them more than we should, that we're using social media more than we should. Like all of my students, when we're kind of talking through, like, are you going to give up anything for Lent? They're all like, I'm gonna try to scroll less. So there's this, like, we all kind of have this knowledge that we probably need to be doing less of these things we're doing, especially with technology. But, kind of all of these just kind of oversaturated, pleasure filled kind of things that try to create this sense of ease. I think the disconnect for so many of us, and this is why I've really enjoyed getting to study dopamine, is how then do we do this? How do we put this into practice, especially when, for so many students, this is all we've known for our lives. When you've grown up with a phone or an iPad or computer, video games, like that's just something that you've known and your brain has been formed and shaped. And so it's not just something that you can just kind of by knowledge go, yes, I know I need to be off this, so I'm going to delete Instagram. In fact, a couple of years ago, I got rid of social media for Lent, and I found myself just like scrolling my email because my brain was just like, you need something, you need a distraction. And I think, that I think the how do we actually do that is usually the question that students are asking, and that I get to speak into. And I think like, though we can maybe be a little wary of like, obviously the answer is Jesus, right? But like, can we use, secular advice to get there? And it's like, well, you look at Jesus, he used agricultural parables to explain things. You look at wisdom literature, they were, using just kind of general like wisdom from that day and age, since all wisdom comes from God. Even wisdom from a non-Christian is inspired by God. And so it's like even these, a scientist who might not be a Christian, the wisdom that they're getting about our brain comes from God. And so, finding tools of, how can we actually successfully implement things into our lives that are going to help us learn to say no, that are going to help us to manage um, technology, that are going to help us manage, how can we actually live, abundant lives, as Jesus says in John 10. How can we actually do that in our lives? And so I think those are kind of the conversations I feel like that I have a lot with students, and I try to, tailor small groups like that.
And I'm glad you're bringing that up, that there might be some pushback at times to, I mean, reading just other literature that's not necessarily explicitly Christian, but obviously, as believers, we believe in common grace. We believe in
Hmm.
general revelation. God reveals Himself through all of creation, and those things. And so, we do need to look to other experts in fields that might be able to help us think of a nuanced perspective. As obviously, Scripture is the ultimate authority on how we think of all of these things. But I am curious, have you gotten any pushback in the church as you're talking about dopamine, as you're talking about neuroscience, things like that? Anything from students or parents? Anything along those lines?
Really, from what I've experienced, not too much. And again, I think that just shows like how hungry we are for solutions. Um, that again, like we all, even though there's all sorts of stats about mental health crisis and those things, like we just feel it. Like we don't even need those stats to know. Like we need some kind of maybe somewhat drastic
Right.
solutions. I would say, if anything, more than pushback, it's almost like one thing that I would kind of caution is almost overcorrection
Right.
towards almost like I was talking about, like our goal is not to just kind of become fully stoic and say like all earthly physical things are bad, right? Jesus resurrected in his physical body. He cares about the physical world. His first miracle was at a wedding. He fed people. He fed, you know, people in so much abundance that there's 12 baskets left over. So he clearly cares about the physical things. The key is, how do we live with him as the center? And so I think, if anything, that's more where I kind of have had to push back a little bit, is just saying we don't need to say things are bad. We just need to say, how do we enjoy them as gifts from God instead of as ultimate things.
Hey there, this is Brent Corbin, Executive Director for RYM. Thank you so much for joining us on this season of the RYM podcast as we explore the effects of the God-given gift of dopamine on all of our lives in this technological age. Our podcast is just part of our array of resources which we provide to the church and parents in the church and anyone seeking to invest in the lives of young people. So head over to rym.org/resources to see what we have for you there. And our resources are themselves just a part of our array of offerings for the church. We also offer summer youth conferences. This summer we will have 9 conferences from coast to coast where churches can bring their youth students and youth groups, and they can learn alongside one another with over 15 hours of biblical instruction, interaction, as well as some serious fun along the way. We even have some openings this summer, so head over to rym.org/conferences to learn more about those. And if you or someone you know is looking to develop in your skills and understanding of how to think critically and effectively about how to minister to and care for youth, then you'll want to check out our RYM training initiatives to see if there's something there for you. So whether you're brand new in youth ministry or you've been in the game a long time as a minister or as a parent or a volunteer, we suspect there will be many ways for you to benefit from our decades of combined wisdom and experience in this space. So head over to rym.org/training to learn more there. As you've heard, our website is full of information that we hope is useful for you and for your church. So head over to rym.org, and if you'll scroll down to the bottom of that homepage and sign up for one of our newsletters that's applicable to you, you'll stay up to date on the latest of all that we have to offer. Now back to the show.
One thing that was actually interesting was kind of in connection to faith. and people saying like, what do I do when I'm kind of burned out of my faith? Um, and how do I, when I feel like I'm going through the motions and I'm going to church and I'm going to retreats and I'm trying to pray and I'm trying to read the Bible and I'm kind of having this like lack of motivation, to kind of use that dopamine word, like what do I do there? And I think that question was probably maybe one of the harder ones because in some ways that's somewhat individual. Um, but I think really the answer to all of those things is kind of thinking about what are the habits in our lives, uh, and understanding how our habits shape us. James K. Smith does a lot of great writing, and he has a book, "You Are What You Love." He has some other books and some podcasts, but kind of thinking how are our habits forming us and shaping us? Even little things like what is our screen time versus our Bible time. Um, even if you've ever tried like some sort of fasting and going, am I as hungry for Scripture as I am for food if I skip a meal? You know, if I
Yes.
skip a day without the Bible, do I feel something? Because I certainly feel something if I go a day without my phone or a day without food. Um, and so it's like, okay, what are those? Those are showing habits that we are kind of being formed by being, you know, in technology or by always seeking what is the best kind of food. I mean, I live in Austin. Austin's a foodie city. Everyone's always wanting to try new places, the new coffee shop, the new best, what's the best taco in Austin? What's the best chips and queso? Again, all great gifts from God. But it can kind of become about, you know, I have to maximize my enjoyment. I have to maximize my time at the lake, my time at Texas football, my time, eating Tex-Mex. Um, and those become those things that form us and shape us because every day we're waking up thinking, how can I maximize my pleasure today? Not how can I serve God today? How can I love others today? How can I, um, take up my cross daily? And so we're so often kind of formed against that simply just by being in this world oftentimes.
Well, I know too that we just, thinking of the daily quiet time, thinking
Mm,
of time where we're alone in the word, we're still, we're focused, and trying to compare that to just the phone and all that the phone can offer and smart, just everything that's there. You just think of, that's already a challenging practice, not because only because of our sinful hearts, but the evil one just attacking us, keeping us from wanting to be alone and commune with the Lord. But now adding this aspect of technology, dopamine, all of these things, it's just such a battle that's just, seems to increase all the more now. I am curious, and I know we kind of talked about this at the beginning, as I did youth ministry for quite some time, I don't think I ever mentioned dopamine once in all of my years of youth ministry because things have just changed so much now.
mhm.
Um, and you're obviously talking about this with your students, as we've said, and you've got a retreat coming up. What, yeah, how are your students noticing this, thinking differently about this? Like, I think we taught on worldview one summer and we talked about movies, and I had my students saying, I'm looking at movies totally different now. Things I didn't think
Mm.
about are just kind of, are your students coming to you like, I noticed this today. I've noticed this habit, whatever, anything along those lines?
You know, I remember kind of when you're talking about the worldview, and I remember actually this was before the dopamine talk a couple summers ago, but kind of in the same vein, I was talking about consumerism, which absolutely kind of ties into dopamine because that's a lot of times consumerism tries to make us feel this deficit. So we feel like we have to go get something, and dopamine kind of increases when we feel a lack because it's trying to help us survive. Um, and so I kind of played some commercials and we kind of looked through like, what are these commercials trying to kind of almost manipulate in us? What were they trying to make us feel? And then, in response to like what we're going to try to buy. And then obviously you buy something and we want to keep buying things because again, this is just kind of this dopamine, like always consuming more. And so I had some students come up to me afterwards and they're like, yeah, I can't watch advertisements the same anymore because, now I'm just kind of thinking, what are they trying to sell me? How are they? And in fact, now like me and my roommate will do this. We'll watch commercials, and you know, it'll be something for like Alexis, and they're at a beautiful house, and they're like, innovation that doesn't make you feel excellent or rich or whatever, like isn't worth it. And it's like, man, what is the lie here? Like it is clearly trying to sell this false version of the good life. And so I've certainly noticed that with myself and students, kind of with kind of consumerism and advertisements and marketing. Um, and I think maybe a little bit, I'll have students start to kind of notice it with like schoolwork and
Mhm.
AI and ChatGPT, and even kind of starting to think through, is this like, I feel like this isn't making me, like this is making me dumber because I'm not doing the hard work. And so the neuro circuits in the brain aren't being kind of like challenged to grow. And so I'm actually like, not learning anything because I'm outsourcing this to kind of this other website to do things for me.
Mhm. And I do just have to say, I mean, all that great. I'm so glad we didn't plan this, but we're actually having an entire episode on marketing and consumerism.
Awesome.
That's forthcoming as as this airs with Dr. Walt Mueller. He'll be coming on talking about that because that is obviously so connected
Hmm.
to dopamine. I know we're going to be wrapping this up before too long, but I am curious, just interactions with parents. As you've talked about this, we know, and we say this all the time on the podcast, youth ministry isn't just ministry to youth, it's ministry to families. And I know you're interacting with parents. Um, any questions you're getting from them, any conversations that you're having with them about dopamine?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly with our parents, I think technology is probably the biggest question that our parents have, which is like how are we supposed to manage technology? I mean, even talking to my parents, I have a little sister who's 17, so she's still a teenager, still in high school. My mom will call me and be like, should I give her Instagram?" Um, and uh, and I'm like, I don't know, mom. You're the mom. But no, like that really is a question I get a lot, especially with social media, and kind of. I think the hard battle is managing the social cost of not having it versus the emotional cost of having it.
Mhm.
Um, and I think for a while, I probably would have kind of said, it's a hard balance. Let's try to do it carefully. I think the more you study it, the more you like look at what Instagram is doing to us, what TikTok is doing to us. Like I would just have a lot of caution. Um, I think I want to say it was Jonathan Haidt who, in an article, compared social media and especially Instagram to alcohol, in
Mhm.
that it is kind of it's a numbing kind of behavior that affects some people more than others. And so I think there is some wisdom of saying, if you're a parent and thinking about your child, like, is this something, knowing my child, is this something that I think is going to negatively affect them? And the science says, especially teenage girls, that it has a negative impact. But anyone who kind of struggles with anxiety, struggles with comparing themselves. I mean, that's something I've struggled with is you go on Instagram, and I like to do photography, landscape photography kind of on the side. And I'll just find myself, getting so down because I go on Instagram and I look at everyone else's pictures that they're taking. I'm like, well, they're better than mine. Like, why am I even doing this?
Mhm.
Um, and so I think just even kind of whether you're a student checking in with yourself, a parent checking with your students, going, is this actually something that is going to be beneficial for me? Or is this something that like probably might be a negative behavior kind of just based on my tendencies? And so I mean, that's something even I in my own life, kind of go back and forth on. But I've certainly seen like, I don't feel better after being on Instagram. Like I don't think many of us do. Um, you either feel like just worse because you're comparing yourself, or you just kind of feel that like that kind of low energy, kind of grogginess of being on it for too long. Um, and so, but I know it's hard because it's everywhere. And so, I think if you are gonna allow it, being really thoughtful about boundaries, being thoughtful about how much time is being spent, and again, thinking about like what is our social media time versus our time in word and prayer around Christian community. just as far as thinking through like how are we being formed and how are we being shaped. And so trying to be wise about, if we spend 3 hours on Instagram and 5 minutes in the Bible each day, what's probably going to have a stronger influence on our life. And so just kind of being thoughtful about those kind of things. Also, we were created as people who desire. Like desire is not wrong. In fact, there's this great theologian Alexander Schmemann who just has a fun name to say, but he's also brilliant. But he talks about how in his book For the Life of the World, he says man is presented as a hungry being, and the whole world is his food. He's talking about man in the garden. Like God, one of the first things he does is he gives Adam like this garden and gives him rules about this meal because God has created man before the fall with desire, with hunger, right? When he creates Eve, Adam has this like love song, poetry, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Like desire is not wrong. What happens is when we start to desire, as we've been talking about, when we start to desire things outside of them being gifts from God. And so again, Schmemann kind of continues with this idea that like, or he says that the whole world is presented to Adam before the fall as this all-embracing banquet table for man. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which they eat from, right? All these trees have been kind of blessed by God, except for that one. And so there's really life and blessing found in those things because they are blessed by God. And when we eat of something outside of God, there is no kind of blessing and life from it. And so that's why like we talk about like the sea being filled and never having enough. When we try to consume things without kind of God being involved, without them being gifts from God, when we consume things in ways that God hasn't intended them to be, there is no life in them. Shmamon even talks about like when like food is literally dead, and so outside of God, we're communing with death. But when we bring God into a meal, when we bring God into a friendship, when we bring God into a relationship and seek to honor God and honor the other person, honor God and honor the, whatever the blessing is he's given us, now there is life because God is life and God is the giver of life. And so I think, I guess the last thing I'll say here is I think when it comes to desire, and I kind of did this in the season of Advent of just kind of going, okay, what is it that I'm actually desiring? And how am I trying to meet those desires? And I think like I would encourage you if you're wanting to kind of do this practice, put your phone away. But it was in Advent, so I kind of went in a dark room, lit a candle, go in a place where it's going to be a little uncomfortable, and then go, okay, what am I like deep down? Not just like I'm hungry or I want to go get into this college. Deep down, like what is it that I'm desiring? Is it approval? Is it forgiveness? Is it relief from pain? Like what is it deep down that I'm desiring? And then what am I doing in my life to try to meet those desires? And so often there's a disconnect that the things we're doing to try to meet our desires are not enough. It's like trying to open up like a traditional, lock with a key card. We're just never going to do it. And so I think that's been really helpful for me for saying, okay, with my deepest desires, how can I then look to God as the one who can fulfill them? Because the things of this world just are going to come up short time and time again. But we can't, if we don't name those things, we'll never look to God to be the fulfiller of those things. And we'll kind of this is kind of where we get stuck in that loop, that feed swipe or whatever that the addictive behavior, because we keep looking to that thing to solve our problems instead of looking to God as the one who has life and who is the giver of life and who gives us salvation and forgiveness and restoration and love.
That's really good. That's really helpful, and I appreciate just the practical nature of that. I mean, just that practice you just described, and it does seem like so much of this conversation comes back to the idea of fasting. Whether or
Mm,
not it's just
mhm,
a brief period in the morning where it's like we're not going to look at the phone and we're going to be alone with the Lord, or if it is a longer period of time where we're just taking intentional steps to just kind of push back on this notion of dopamine and again dopamine, there's good and bad things about it. It's not this negative
mhm.
thing that we're trying to just suppress all the time. But I'm curious as we close this out, other practical thoughts, anything that you're just telling students, hey, this would be a helpful practice for you, or parents, here's some helpful action items from this, or even from your elective this summer, anything along those lines?
Yeah, I'm so glad we can kind of close out talking practicality, because I think that's kind of so much of the point of this is how can we kind of grow in this. And I'm glad you brought up fasting. I think in my elective I called fasting wall sits for the soul. No one likes wall sits, right? It's kind of what you do at the end of a workout, and your legs are shaking. You're like, why are we doing this? But what you're doing in a wall sit, right, is like for the fourth quarter, when everyone else is tired, you have the legs. And so I think these practices of kind of taking things off, like fasting might be doing, our culture is bad at moderation. We're all bad at moderation. Well, how can we get good at moderation if we have not built the muscles to do so? And so what doing kind of different seasons of fasting, whether it is, you know, um, no phone for, an hour, whether it is no sugar for the 40 days of Lent, whatever it is that you might do. And you can start small. Again, fasting is not about earning our salvation. It's about growing closer to God because we already have salvation. But in taking off these things, we're actually building these muscles that we've kind of lost because our world has kind of become about how can we make things easy. And so I think one of kind of the best practical applications is be okay doing things that are somewhat challenging.
Mm.
Like, don't let AI be your first tool when you're trying to learn. Be okay trying and failing. Be okay having maybe the slightly awkward, like talking to your teacher for 5 to 10 minutes afterwards and asking them, "Hey, I don't get this." Um, maybe it is taking, a break from your phone, or taking a break from social media, taking time to be silent, um, taking time to pray and to study God's word. Um, and I think even, there's so many good behaviors. Like when you read these books, ice baths are a huge one. And I've done ice baths. They kind of feel good afterwards. And I think there certainly can be some benefits to things like that. I do think it's interesting that in our world, we'll still do whatever it takes to like do something to make us feel better that isn't like relationally challenging. Like, I think one of the best challenging behaviors we can do is to engage in relationships with other people.
Mhm.
Like the goal of the Christian life, is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And Jesus tells us, like, to follow Him means to take up our cross. And so that means, like, as Christians, we should be okay with and not be surprised when we face suffering. And that doesn't mean necessarily like huge amounts of suffering. Maybe it will, if you go serve in like a place where you face persecution. But again, that might just be like engaging with a sibling who really annoys you. That might be, asking friends like hard questions that they might laugh at you about, but then they might follow up and be like, "Yeah, I'm glad you actually asked me how my breakup was." Um, it might be, learning to say no to temptations, or deleting, apps on your phone that might lead you into temptations. Um, Doing these things, like, this is taking up our cross, and this is what we're called to do. And fortunately, because of the resurrection, we have hope that when we take up our cross, there is always new life that follows that. Um, and so I would just encourage everyone in your life, like, think through what might be a couple behaviors. You don't have to start big. What might be something you could fast from, whether, again, could be a phone for an hour, could be something for a longer period of time. What might be some relationships I could engage with that might be challenging? What might be ways I could push myself in school or in offering to do the dishes? Or like little things. It doesn't have to be big things, but how can I kind of do these things, and in doing them, really seek to grow closer to God and grow others closer to God? I think that should be our ultimate goal, not how can we make our lives better, because there can be some of that with the dopamine world of like, I'm doing this so I feel better.
Mm.
And really, our goal should be, how can we grow closer to God, and how can we grow closer to others and grow them closer to God?
That's great. Yeah, Thomas, just appreciate all the work you're putting into this, all the reading and conversations and teaching and all of it. And just again, thanking you for giving us this idea to talk about this season on the podcast. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thank y'all. I'm so glad that y'all are doing this and doing this series. I can't wait to listen to some of the other interviews, especially on Lemke, and she is so wise, and I'm sure y'all have so many other just awesome guests lined up.
Wake up and break yourself out of here. Don't be one of the cold souls who disappear. Stop believing and telling the lie. Why don't you look your life in the eye?
Thanks for listening to the RYM podcast and this season of the Dopamine Delusion. Special thanks to the Arcadian Wild for the use of their song Dopamine, and to our editors Joe Deegan and Virginia Stroud. Be sure and check out the show notes for links, resources, or books mentioned in today's episode. If today's topic resonated with you, please take the time to share this episode with a friend who might find it beneficial. For more information about our student conferences, youth leader training, and other resources, be sure to visit rym.org. See you next week for another episode of the Dopamine Delusion.